Hello and welcome to the NFL DFS slate breakdown for Monday, December 4th. We got the Bengals versus the Jaguars. It is going to be an interesting one for prop betting and for DFS. As far as just to watch, maybe not. But at least we have DFS to fall back on. So we're going to be going over the slate. But before we do, come join us at LineStar. And I want to shout out some of our partners here. We got Thrive, Sleeper, Underdog, and CHALKBOARD. You can get up to 1 month free if you are a new user to any of those. So you can come try us out for cheap, and you get a new book to bet on. It's a win-win. Come join us and join the fun. Get involved in chat and hang out with us for a bit. All right, now let's get into this slate. As we spoke about, it is Cincinnati at Jacksonville, 39.5 total, so low total, 10-point favorites to the Jags. Not a ton new injury-wise with these two teams. Couple things, though, that I obviously got to bring up. Obviously, it is no Joe Burrow. He's out for the season. T. Higgins is going to be back in this game. And then ETN has a rib issue and was limited in practice all week. However, he is expected to play. All right. So now let's get into the slate itself. So, as always, started with quarterback. We got Lawrence versus Browning. Obviously, Lawrence is the much better play. Not only can he pass, but he also has some rushing upside, and he's rushed for 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. Now, that being said, they were, more of the tush-push type variety, and he hasn't really had big yardage totals rushing outside of, Saints 59 yards, Falcons 42 yards. So he's had a couple, and he can get you a couple extra points with his legs, but not a giant rusher. And this is not a game that I think he's going to really have to break out his legs. I do think the Jags are likely going to roll over the Bengals. I think the Bengals have already started making plans in the offseason, trying to figure out where they're going to vacation. So I think Lawrence is a fine play. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I do, however, think that the Jags are going to be able to do whatever they want on offense. If they want to pass the ball on the Bengals, they're going to. If they want to run on the Bengals, they're going to. And I think I would make lines, with that in mind. On the Browning side, look, he hasn't been awful, just hasn't been great. Can he get you there as part of a flex piece? Yes, absolutely. At 8,800, he's cheap enough. He can do it. He can get you to be optimal as a flex spot. On to FanDuel. Browning's probably a little too expensive here. Although more ownership is going here than on DraftKings, which is surprising to me. I actually think his pricing is better on DraftKings. But all in all, kind of the same scenario there. You could play either of both of them are absolutely in play. And if you want to look at the matchup data, the one thing going for Browning is they are a very, very tough rushing D. Best rush D in the league, but they have allowed some passing. And several guys have had some pretty good games versus them. The one thing I will point out, the guys that have had good games versus them, Stroud, Purdy, Allen, Stroud, Mahomes, Richardson was able to rush one in, and then Carr had an okay game. So it's been your better quarterbacks that have done well. Minshew didn't do great, but he did pass for 329. Ritter did terrible, 191 and 2 picks. Will Levis didn't do good. Dobbs didn't do great. Well, that was last season, but pretty much what I'm getting at is poor quarterbacks or below average quarterbacks in the NFL have struggled versus them. Pickett included here. So while it's not the hardest matchup it might be a little difficult for Browning. Now, getting over to the running back spot, we got Mixon and ETN as the two clear favorite options. Now, ETN is, I think, a absolutely great option on this slate. Cincinnati Bengals are 30th in DVOA versus the rush, so I think it sets out very, very good for ETN. Now, if you're worried about his rib, and if it is a little bit more of an issue than the team is letting on, then Dearness Johnson becomes a very interesting play, as well as Tank Bigsby. Dearness has been the RB2 as of late. He's been the one getting a little bit more work and being involved in both passing and rushing games. So you could pivot off to him, especially if you think this is an absolute blowout where the Jags just totally roll on the Bengals. In that case, there could be some garbage time, Dearness, as with the rib injury. Maybe the Bengals or the Jags want to pull ETN out of the game a little bit earlier than they would due to the fact that he is a little banged up. Mixon, I didn't really love him as a fantasy producer when Burrow was there. Now he's got the number one rush D that he's going against and Browning. So I just don't really love his upside. He will get some targets, and I think in the passing game, that is the spot that he could do decently. But you're pretty much just hoping for a couple checkdowns and him being able to take one to the house for him to be full of chalk, or DFS value. And getting over to FanDuel, ETN 43%, Mixon down to 28. This is much more what I would kind of think the ownership should be. And obviously this is likely, big time due to pricing being a little bit more expensive on Mixon than on DraftKings, but all in all, all the same stuff goes. In a giant, just Jaguars crushing of the Bengals, I think the ancillary RBs have some value, but outside of that, I don't really love anybody but ETN from the running back spot. And getting over to the matchups, as we can see, Bengals have just been giving it up. Edwards had 2 touchdowns. 3 running backs in a row have scored a touchdown versus them. They've given up a lot of yards. I think this is an ETN game. And getting over to wide receiver on DraftKings, our highest owned wide receiver, Calvin Ridley. Next, we got Christian Kirk, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and Zay Jones. Zay Jones and Tyler Boyd are the beginning of, the cheap, more flyer types. Tyler Boyd getting 20% ownership. I do think that's a little bit high for him. I would much rather go Zay Jones at 9% and a cheaper salary. Zay Jones is heavily involved in this offense. 7 targets over the last 2 weeks after being gone for, quite a while. And he's been gone for a while for this season. I think he's an interesting dart throw. He can absolutely get it done. And I would be intrigued with him. Also, I'd be very intrigued with T. Higgins. You get a wide receiver of this caliber at below 10% ownership. I think that's crazy, and he's cheap enough where I would probably be taking some swings, and he is got to be my favorite low-owned pivot to throw in there. I don't mind going to Jamar Chase today. The one thing I would say is that because the Jags pass funnel, their D is very good. Their rush D is very good. Their pass D is, a little closer to average. I think Jamar Chase can win. He had 84 yards last week. We know he is good after the catch. So it doesn't take much for him to be able to be optimal. He's going to get his targets. It's just if he is able to break one or not. So I don't mind going there. Out of Kirk and Ridley, I do favor Kirk. He is cheaper and less owned, but Ridley can absolutely have his way, and we do have 5-star alert score on Ridley. Matchup data looks very good as well. So that's kind of breaking it all down for the wide receiver. And off to FanDuel. We got pretty much the same mix, with Ridley being the highest owned, Kirk just under that, but T. Higgins and not Chase as the highest owned Bengal wide receiver, and that's likely because Chase is 15K. And if people are staying away from Chase on FanDuel, I'd be all in on him. Hey, he's too good of a player to be under 10% owned in a single game tournament. Now, while I don't think he's going to be under 10, under 20, he's still too good of a player at that point. Wide receiver wise, Zay Jones has the best matchup. Several WR3s have done pretty well versus them, so don't mind going Zay Jones. What we talked about, Jamar Chase has and T. Higgins both have a decent matchup. 23rd versus wide receiver 1 and 2 for Jags. So I think that is interesting. And as I talked about, I do prefer Kirk over Ridley. And the matchup tool agrees, as Ridley actually is, a moderately tough matchup, as Diggs and Marquise Brown are the only wide receiver ones that have even got into double digits versus the Jags, or versus the Bengals. And flip it over to tight end. We got Evan Ingram, Tanner Hudson, and Irv Smith. After that, it is absolute dart throws. And as we always talk about, you got to consider the dart throws in these single games, especially tight ends, because once you get down to the goal line, they're absolutely heavily involved. Ingram is by far in the best matchup. He has been heavily involved on the team all season long. And even with Zay Jones back, he's still averaging 7 targets a game, averaging 7.5 on the year. You can definitely go to him, and Cincinnati has been weak versus the tight end, so it makes a lot of sense going there. Tanner Hudson has been heavily involved for a few weeks now, 4, 5, 6, 7 targets over those last 4, so I think he is absolutely of interest again. And Irv Smith would be my secondary tight end that I would be interested in, and then after that, it's just total punt city. Going over to FanDuel, Ingram, Irv, and Sample. Tanner Hudson is way down at 6% owned. I would absolutely be interested in Hudson down there. He could definitely get in the end zone, get 5 catches and 50 yards, something like that. So going that low owned at 7,500 would be of interest. Ingram is the best play there. And looking over at matchups, obviously Ingram's the better one. 31st first tight end, but don't sleep on this spot for Tanner Hudson. The Jags are 21st against tight end, so he can get it done. Kicker wise, it's been tough going versus both of these Ds for the kickers, but McPherson absolutely has a leg and can get it done. Meanwhile, McManus is averaging 10.2 points per game, so I think that is at least of interest. The Jags are going to be controlling this game likely. If they stall a couple times in the red zone, McManus is going to have his way. And McManus is getting a little more ownership on both sides, but the ownership difference between the two isn't dramatic enough that I would sway one side or the other. And then lastly, got to cover the Ds. Look, Jacksonville is a 10-point favorite. They are likely going to be sending some pressure or just trying to really get after this quarterback once they have a decent lead, and that just leads to more throwing and more chances of scoring. So you definitely have to consider the defense in this game, especially the Jags. So that'll do it for us today, guys. A quick one. interesting little slate. Just try and get a little different where you can, and good luck. Let's win some money. Adios, guys.